Kid Cudi. What can I say about Kid Cudi? A lot, but we'll keep it short because I know that this review would be very long if I spent a long time just talking about Kid Cudi. Now, I don't hate Kid Cudi, not at all actually. I'm very fond of his first three projects, especially Man on the Moon, the first one. That's really good. I'd give it this rating up here. It was like a moody, introspective hip-hop album that had some great songs on it. Not just Pursuit of Happiness, which was the big one, and not just Day and Night, but also Up Up and Away, Soundtrack to My Life. But as Kid Cudi progressed onwards, and I know that artists have to switch things up, that's what Kanye does, that's what Kendrick does, but Kid Cudi started to really go into rock or punk music. And that's what resulted in albums like The Wizard Project or even Speedin Bullet to Heaven, which was released last year and not one of those albums that you'd be very fond to reflect on after listening to. And if I blow my brains out all over the scene. But we'll push that aside right now because right now we've got Passion, Pain and Demon Slayin to look into, and considering some of the singles that dropped before the album's release, I was pretty confident that this was going to be a step in the right direction for Cudi. Because whilst the idea of Kid Cudi venturing into punk and rock was an interesting one, it certainly didn't result in some very good renditions of those genres, so maybe hip-hop was more so his thing. Now, if you've heard much of the news about Cudi, you'd know that he had gone into rehab because of his depression and problems to do with mental illness and such, and he addresses this on this album a lot. In fact, he had touched on it previously on his albums, but this time around it certainly was a very evident part of the album, and this time around I was very impressed by the significant increase in maturity that he covered the topic with, for the most part anyways. For me, the album does kind of start a little slow and quite lethargic, although the songs that it starts off with aren't necessarily bad, just very long-winded tracks that kind of go up to the 4 to 5 minute mark. Frequency kicks the album off, and on second thought I wouldn't even say kick, I'd say more like toe onto stage with the rope. I don't know. It certainly isn't the most energetic track out here, and there's a weird sound effect worked into the beat that sounds like duck quacks. And I know that albums like Man on the Moon had slow jams all over them, so what makes this track not so great? Well, it's the fact that there's no real emotional progression on here. It just seems to stay at the same level of not just energy, but also just the same level in general, just as a track. It doesn't progress anywhere, it doesn't take you anywhere. Because it's 5 minutes long, you're basically getting 5 minutes of very lukewarm material. And it does get very tedious after a while. Maybe if it was snipped to about 2 to 3 minutes long, it would have been much better. The track after this, Swim in the Light, did have some interesting use of auto-tune, especially towards the end where it's all harmonizing together, and I did think that was kind of nice. It did seem to very explicitly address his depression. And so does the track Releaser, which is after this one. This one tries to be a little more spacey and lethargic, as do a lot of the tracks on here, but Releaser in particular is another track on here that doesn't seem to do much with its spaciness or emptiness. Instead, it doesn't really progress anywhere as a track. Instead, you're just kind of left floating in there and not really given any reason to be emotionally captivated. Not for the entire length of the track anyways. Thankfully, after this, you get By Design, a far more upbeat track that was probably one of the better tracks on here. In fact, I think it's one of the best ones, and not just thanks to Andre 3000, who is worth mentioning on here because he does have a good verse and some good vocals during that chorus, but also because Cudi's singing is genuinely great on that hook. There's a little bit of a tropical vibe going on thanks to the steel drums as well. Now, those are the first 4 tracks, and I feel they kind of do sum up very well the content on this album to come, because there are like 19 tracks on this thing, and I couldn't talk about all of them separately, so I'll just sum up them into different categories that are kind of hinted at with these first 4 tracks. You do get the very spacey, lethargic tracks that are just kind of too stagnant to really make you feel like you're being pushed emotionally or captivated emotionally. Then you get the more successful spacey and lethargic tracks here. Those we'll get onto later. They kind of build up a nice dreamy atmosphere and actually have very gorgeous instrumentals as well as very good vocal performances. The thing that actually really shocked me was the track Rose Golden, which had Willow Smith on it, and I was not a fan of Willow Smith's album Apodithecus. Obviously you have the Whip My Hair track that came out beforehand. So obviously my experience with Willow Smith's music hadn't always been the most positive one, but she complemented this track really well. Like, I know it was just backup vocals for Cudi, but still, I felt like they actually had a place on the track, and the gorgeous string sections on the instrumental, there are also the fluttering harps and the horns and the strings. I genuinely think, not just in the case of if I had to pick a favorite track, no, I genuinely think that this is one of the best tracks on here by a long shot. You know, not only that, but lyrically it's an uplifting look into self-belief and faith and believing in oneself, and have hope in yourself that you will flourish well into the future. I guess I could say positive things about the track Does It. Not all of Kid Cudi's lyrics hit like bullseye there, but I feel like it was nice to hear Cudi just be a little more energetic, bring a lot more energy to the album that time round, and just amongst the more lethargic, dreamy tracks on here. And as for the slower jams on this thing, like Baptized in Fire featuring Travis Scott, another track that doesn't really go anywhere. Then you got the track Mature Nature, which has quite pretty instrumental, but the vocal performance and lyrics are kind of dull, a little bit dreary as well. Kind of has this deadpan whispered kind of delivery to them that didn't really bode well for me there at that point of the album. Thankfully, from then on, like the last quarter of the album kind of contains more sci-fi tracks. Like they have that really like robotic, spacey sci-fi feel more than the rest of the album, like Kitchen and Cosmic Warrior, and even especially The Guide, which had the most robotic vocals on the album. Then the last two tracks on here are just, they're probably some of the best ones too. The Commander, it's a very good track about taking control of your life again, and at that point in the album it feels like Cudi is bouncing back from the depression. He's ready to take control of his life again and kind of just tackle the obstacles ahead. And Surfin is like the perfect way to end the album, and in fact I think it's one of the best songs of the year, no joke. Even before I went into this album, I made a promise to myself that, you know, regardless of what I think of the album as a whole, Surfin will still remain one of the best songs of the year, and I will still stand by that. The drums on that track are awesome. It's an uplifting, upbeat track as well. It's like the final word from Kid Cudi, and he's saying that I'm not riding any waves, I'm making my own waves. Again, it fits in with that taking control of my whole life situation there on the album. Now overall, Passion, Pain and Demon Slayin is more of a step in the right direction for Cudi. You know, I see the progression on the album is kind of going from a more moody, subdued, a depressed state of mind, and eventually progresses towards someone who's a lot more okay. He's like, I'm just ready to slay my demons, I've cleaned out my closet, and I'm ready to move on, which is kind of a really cool idea. But I feel like in the case of each track that makes up this progression, you know, those tracks don't really have their own progression, which makes a lot of the album feel quite stagnant. Even though I understand the progression going on throughout the album, it certainly doesn't feel captivating enough to have done that in concept justice. However, some good tracks came out of this album. I certainly think it's a huge improvement from Speedin Bullet to Heaven because it was actually focused. In fact, I think it's the most focused that Kid Cudi's been in ages, so I'd give this album, you know, even though it seems like a pretty meh score, but 5 out of 10 considering what happened before is a pretty big bounce upward. And I feel like if Cudi just kind of trims the fat on the track listing, kind of doesn't make things too long, I think he could definitely keep making the great hip-hop that made me enjoy his music when Man on the Moon and A Kid Called Cudi were being released. So